we'd like to start by just giving thanks to everyone for being here, and just to come to listen to our I guess our opinions, and hopefully we can influence some of your thoughts to have a good mind about food sovereignty and whatnot. Um, Again, thank you. Um, I guess what I can start off by saying is that we kind of believe in a right and almost a duty to pursue our distinct foodways, as the many different tribal nations around, and that we kind of think for um, having a good mind, having a good body and spirit, it's important for us to save those foodways before we kind of move on to another food culture, because many of our food cultures are damaged or broken, if you will. So it's kind of what we talk about a little bit here as a group of the four of us and many others, um, as chefs and people that are concerned with food in a probably a different light than, say, a seed keeper or a farmer or a rancher, if you will.
Or an educator.
Yeah, educator, right? I said I was going to add that in. So I guess what we're talking about a little bit here is pursuing our historic foodways before we start to move on. So if I think if we can understand our historical foodways and understand what we consider our historic foodways now, I would point to our corn soups having pork in them. I would like us to go a little bit further back and understand why pork is there to begin with, and what we've removed from such things. So I think as chefs, we tend to think of if we can know where we've been with the food, we can know where we're going. So I don't always think that we should jump forward without realizing where we've been with our food. And because our food is so fragmented, we need to kind of do a lot of learning as we're trying to teach and recreate newer things for the modern palate, if you will. I think as a group last year, several of us met together and said, hey, where's our spices? Where's all the flavors that we know are there, but everyone else kind of says, oh, well, indigenous food's bland, or it's supposed to be bland, or there's no salt, or things like that. When you kind of, if you read a little bit into history, or just as a chef or somebody that eats often enough, you're not going to eat bland food 5 or 6 or 7 days a week without wanting to strangle somebody. So I don't always think that's the route to just say, oh, well, we didn't have salt. Well, why didn't we have salt? If we don't have salt now, why? And sometimes that's just because we've been put on reserves or reservations that either don't have that salt supply, or as our governments were kind of in charge of feeding us and helping us to survive. Salt was one of those things that could get sold off by, say, an Indian agent, if you will. So pretty soon we don't have any salt, and then within a generation or two, we don't eat salt in anything, and nobody knows why. So I think it's up to some of us to ask why we don't have things, why we do have things, or why things are way. And then from a chef standpoint, we can then create maybe modern renditions or rescued things that are believable, if you will, as replacements to our foodways. So to extrapolate on things mainly from flavors, if you will. Anyone else want to add anything to that? What you all been thinking of? I know you are having.
I actually have a question.
Well.
So I'm like sort of these are my teachers, so I'm always like with questions and trying to learn, because I am an educator and I try to teach the kids how to live, in a way that's non-colonial, in that they don't, I teach at a university and they're here to extract an education, and they extract food from the land and they extract water from the land. And that to me is very colonial. So when they're here, I want them to live with the land. And also, as somebody who's been through this system, I've felt sick for a very long time because I've been away for so long from my home. And I'm trying to reconstruct healthy foodways for myself and the people around me. But about the salt thing, Dave, in commodity foods, do they put salt? Because maybe that's why we don't add salt, is because everything was so salty. And then you don't think to shake it in or something.
Right. I think now we're going to find a lot more of that salt in those commodity foods. But in the past, when you're just given bags of beans and sacks of potatoes and whatnot,
Mhm.
um, yeah, there were some things that were salted, salted beef, salted pork. Obviously, that's how kind of that finds its way into our corn soups and whatnot. But I think you have to realize that the destruction of our foodways have been happening for a real long time. So you can kind of say here's a post World War II period, which is what I do with American food a lot of the time. I can say that's post World War II because there's all these convenience foods added to things. There's spice blends. There's all kinds of strange things added that you wouldn't necessarily add. There's condensed milk instead of a custard added to something, and I think sometimes the older the chef you are, the more experience you have as a chef, you can kind of pinpoint things as you have to, as part of your profession, wondering where things come from and why we do things. So at least those of us that are thinkers think of these things. Well, why do we do that like that? Because it's not very good. So I think we've got a period that is post World War II, that's pre World War II, that's for some folks is maybe late 1800s to again that World War I or World War II period when you start to see canned things showing up. So I think you have to understand the historical context of to what our foods have been for the past 150 years, and what they were before that and what they are now, even just the past 20 or 30 years. We freeze salmon now, so we can pull salmon out of the freezer at any time of the year and kind of have sort of fresh salmon that we can eat when traditionally um, fairly seasonal to have like that, and something that we dried and saved for later. So um, not something that you really rehydrated and threw on the grill and had, but may have got crumbled into a soup or a salad or whatnot, or um, cakes. I don't know, but there's all these things that we kind of have to figure out of how we did things and why. Um,
If I
I'm
can jump in here.
yeah,
Well, I think just like anything, right? It's just something that we lost because one of those first things is we weren't harvesting salt anymore, right? And that
right,
was a big deal for different people in different areas, and it was a trade item. Um,
yeah,
so switching over to commodity iodinized salt, then you didn't need to do that anymore. So
right.
even now, with it still being a really cheap product, there's still not really that reason to go back to it other than we know like there's different health benefits in
Well, I
different
think,
salts.
yeah, a lot of people have come to just think of our foodways as being bland, so we don't add that salt until later. Which
Yeah.
our as Mohawks, we added it kind of as something that finished our dish. So not cooking classically in a European sense where there's salt in every part of the dish cooking it. So you're not pre-seasoning things. It was kind of seasoning your meat at the end of the meal versus, I mean, at the end of the cooking, uh, whatnot. So I think there's a lot of things for us to discover as chefs. Um, I think Tawnya and I, we've talked to Mae, even Jessee, we've talked about how um, what are these alternate flavors? We kind of we tease a little bit about onions in corn soup, but as a forager, if you read books about foraging or get online and you read things, as indigenous people, we're credited with eating a lot of things that we don't necessarily eat today, and sometimes our elders don't have any knowledge of us eating any longer, so they were never part of our foodways anymore. And I think that's almost it's a sad point, but it's almost an injustice for us not to go back and reintroduce those things back into our foods. Um,
Yeah.
we foraged a lot. Foraging, though all of us here, we're all part of the agricultural complex that kind of ran through the whole northeastern part of the U.S. here, or northeastern Canada. We still needed to add these wild foods to our foods that we cultivated as well, and we still did a lot of that. I think we've lost that by not moving around a lot. So we just don't have things available to us where we're living that we did traditionally, say, if we were still in the Mohawk Valley. So we've got other things, or maybe we just don't add them to our foods anymore and we've forgotten about it.
Yeah, or if
Well, I
we've been
think the other. Oh, go ahead.
or if we've been sent away to school forever or have to live in a city.
Right.
I thought that was really interesting what you said too. I don't know why stuff never occurs to me, Tawnya, but when you said that things were acquired through trade, like that's such an indicator of broken relatedness and colonization itself, you know, like and that myth that every man stands alone or whatever they're trying to like shove at us. And you know, so you get bland food, or because we're not
don't have things traded.
Yeah.
You know, we don't feel like bringing
Yeah.
your salt too heavy. You know.
Well, I think the other thing too was that big, like you said, Dave, with the wars and that big shift in food and food being preserved and so much salt being in it that almost that was the only seasoning that we had. But like, you know, no offense to like our duras and older people, like they were never trained to cook food. They were trained how to survive on commodities. So, and going into residential schools and stuff, when they went there, like they don't have nothing to go on, right? And they were just doing what they could with what they had. And I think that was an even bigger part of our losing that education, I guess you would say, because you just weren't introduced to things. So a lot of our grandparents, they kind of cook like children, or they cook like 1950s kind of style foods. And our people, we have never came back right from those Sullivan campaigns, and we have never been food stable since then, right? And you know, it's unfortunate, but you know, hopefully we're making that better now.
Tanya's comment about the Sullivan campaign was post of the American Revolution, when George Washington ordered our eradication from the state of New York, which was our traditional homeland. So everything was burned, everything was taken from us. So our orchards, our cornfields, and all that, our food supplies were taken from us. So since basically the inception of the United States, Haudenosaunee folks have been kind of locked out almost of their traditional foodways, if you will. So you tend to change things a little bit. I think where my family comes from up at Akwesasne, and where Tanya lives in Ontario, are different than our traditional homelands that are just west of Albany in the Mohawk Valley, which I've spent many summers in as a child. So just similar but different areas. So I think as you're restricted from leaving areas as well, we stop adding, say, things like bear. We're not allowed to hunt bear in the Adirondacks anymore because we're forbidden from leaving our reserve. And I think that really affected a lot of us more than we admit. And there's no assigning of blame to our elders or anyone else for the things that we've lost, because they've made do and they've survived, and that was their mission, if you will. We tend to say we are someone's seventh generation. So this little group here, we're part of someone's seventh generation. So possibly we're doing what we're supposed to do. So our aspect here is talking about food. So and possibly recovering some things, or creating something new for a modern palate, because all of our people have modern palates now. So it's not like we can go back to 1620 or 1493 or 1490 and say, oh wow, that's how we ate, because I can guarantee you that we'd hate that food now, or we'd hate some of it. And that's just the way it is, because some things were subsistence foods and others are acquired tastes. I've looked at our loss of eating fermented corn, and that's kind of been an amusement that I just really kind of a thing for myself to see. I didn't believe the European accounts that we would throw corn in a puddle and leave it to sit for months and eat it when it was putrid, because we hold corn sacred. So, experiments, and it tastes pretty good as you ferment corn, but I'm lacto fermenting it. But these are the things that I'm kind of talking about, where you need to have a little bit of knowledge to recreate things. And as we recreate new things, or maybe we're rescuing things like the corn that I'm talking about, we have a little bit of understanding on how things taste, or how things should taste. So as professional chefs, we taste things all the time. So one of the things that we've talked about in person, or kind of in private, aside from this panel here, is that the need of some of those foraged items for us to play with. Chefs tend to work 70, 80, 90 hours a week some of the time, so we don't have time to do two things a lot of the time. One of the big ones is forage. Even though that's a very relaxing thing, we don't have the time sometimes to walk in the woods. So we need people to learn how to forage again. so we can utilize some of these foods and hopefully bring them back to our own cultures. Secondly, I say that I might get in trouble here because there's quite a few seed keepers. I think the creator picked out our people to save our seeds, and they've done a phenomenal job with it. And there's people, such as Rowan, that have helped revitalize our seeds and save a lot of things. And this part doesn't include Rowan, but often the seed keepers weren't the ones that should have kept the foodways, because they've kept the seeds, but the foodways have somehow diminished, if you will. But I think we can recover some of that. Not every person should have all of the knowledge, if you will. So I think those of us that have been trained professionally or been around food for a long time understand food on a different level than people that are growing food or people that just enjoy food to eat. Because there's a lot that goes in food that people, when you learn to please people, or you learn how things should taste or things probably shouldn't taste, or too much of something and not enough of another. Food should generally be pleasing to your palate. And I think I'm speaking at least from Tanya's and my angle, from our very robust culture with politics and many other things here. I cannot see us having a bland foodway. So that's part of my impetus, and I kind of urge everyone else that within their cultures is to learn their specific foodways before we're pulling, say, avocados all the way from Mexico. We're setting up a taco stand in every one of our areas here. Tacos are indigenous foods, but they're not necessarily our indigenous foods, if you will. So I don't want to see people rush to embrace a lot of different things that possibly aren't our foodway for our own people that just as vitally need to be saved. So I implore a lot of you that are cooks and chefs and people that are just eating or foragers or that aim to support things to support your regional local foods, if you will. Eat local. I've been big in the farm to table movement and organics and things like that as a chef. So I think it's important for us to eat those local things and support them. So find our food.
I think also in embracing diverse foodways, we have more to draw on, because the world is such a strange place. You never know what the next curve is going to be.
Right.
What there's not going to be any of, or what the modified foods have, sort of like Frankenstein to death. And then, the more things, I mean, that's the beauty of diversity, is being able, that's like our main tool for survival.
Yeah.
Is as a group, as a collective, having all these different ways that we can draw on to continue to persist. The other thing I was thinking about is, how far we've come. If you're thinking about, like Tawnya and you were talking about survival foods, and I'm thinking of people just like, especially in residential schools, just trying not to be sick on their food. And now we're concerned about what things look like the aesthetics and the taste, and like those are like major leaps. How far we've come from like, I don't want to get sick on this, or I want this to be like
right.
palatable, or I don't want to die because I want to have enough nutrient, and how far we've come. That's just what I was thinking when you guys were talking, like, yay.
Well,
I love food.
As the corn harvest season here, you can point out that we're saving all the good seeds, the nice looking seeds, and we're kind of trying to put else into food. So
yeah, we have choices, right?
I've sit sometimes at this table sorting corn, going, yeah, no, yes.
Yeah.
But it's hard though. It's hard as a chef though, because we do and we don't have choices, right? Like it is really hard for us to source ingredients, and it's a constant battle. And I tell people I spend just as much time sourcing as I do in the kitchen. So, it's kind of a blow to integrity when you hear of other people and they're passing off things that they might not be. And, that's hard. And then we do, and we look at our seed keepers and stuff. And I don't know, like for me personally as a chef, because I don't know the ins and outs of these organizations, like all of this stuff is new. Like I'm just a chef, right? Like I don't know about grants and farming programs and like you know, all of that's over my head, and I leave that to those people, right? We all have our goals, we all have our jobs, and there's a place for everybody in whatever our interest might be. But I mean, like, I don't know, as a chef, I'm like, how do I ascertain product from like seed keepers, growers, farmers, people who have been getting grants for like decades, you know, but I can't buy a bean off you. Like, so what is that the point of the grant? I don't know. Maybe it's not. Maybe I don't know. Right. So where can I go to find out that kind of stuff? But like you said, I do want to work regionally, because I want to work with my food. Like Dave said, a taco, like that might be considered a Southwestern Mexican food. But, you know, Haudenosaunee, we definitely had it, but our palates are different. We didn't have chilies. So how do we make our food in our way, right? How do we make it so it tastes like Haudenosaunee? Like, we say leaf bread instead of like tamales, but we never had chilies to put in there. But something that our people haven't lost was that love of taste of corn, right? Like, we don't try to cover up, change it, put something in it. We still love that taste. So I think that's something that we can do to accent it and really revive tastes from our areas and get them back into our food, back in, you know, to our faces, so our kids can grow up with the love of those tastes and have that food memory to draw on later in life. I just think, yeah, it's just an interesting time.
I think that goes back to with also what Dave was saying earlier about understanding like how we cooked historically, you know, how our foods tasted before, you know, World War II in the 1800s. Like, what did our ancestors find to be flavorful? You know, we think very often from a modern palate, and, you know, like Dave said, heavily salted throughout the entire cooking process. But what did our ancestors enjoy? Like, food wasn't always for sustenance.
They adapt.
It was enjoyable.
They adapt those, you know.
You know, one of the things that got me to start thinking to cook indigenous was a story where venison, blueberries, and maple syrup was stewed together, and that combination was just like kind of unreal to me, to mix that with meat, and that kind of like exploded in my mind, like, oh, maybe it's a little different than what I'm used to, but, you know, that's what was found to be flavorful.
Well, I think particularly with maple, a lot of European Americans immediately think sweet, and without that, as those of us in the Northeast know, there's many different depths of flavor to many different maples. So what I try to tell folks is that maple isn't often just a sweetener; it's a flavoring in itself.
Right.
So the darker ones are there not to really, they give a light sweetness, obviously, but they're there for that real, it's almost an umami flavor that really gets in your palate. And
it's
so
also a medicine, because
not there.
The tree to kickstart its system again,
Right,
is dying from its cells from its whole life. So we're able to consume things that are like pre-pollution. You know, right. So even if you just cook, like if like sometimes I just use it like water. You know, I cook something in there because the medicine of the tree is then in my food.
That's one of the things
we call sap children's medicine, right? Like, we do give that to our kids in the spring, and that's why, because the closer to us is the closer to this environment, to what might be, you know, allergies or sicknesses or things that you know, the environment knows that you have to be mindful of this year.
That's the other thing.
It's a ton of learning.
Perhaps we have to be mindful of our relationship to our food, or our plants, if you will. I was grabbing mullein all summer long, and anything else I could find, possibly for fall, just in case.
I still think it's for your toilet paper hauls. Hoarding.
It's nice
well,
toilet paper.
I could make you guys pee the bed. So, you know. What else can we talk about here? I think as we've talked about, we're as chefs, some of us think we're at that point where we've saved a lot of seeds. There's a lot of people saving and sharing our seeds, and I think as professionals, we're asking that some of these things are grown in volume again. And you know, I know Tanya's had that issue. Mae, I sent wild rice to this year.
Yeah.
Because, you know, that's not my big thing. So she got my wild rice earlier. you know, we have issues finding things that are traditional to us that we'd like to offer to our clients and serve a lot of the time. I've just entered into a new business where I'm down to making hominy, and finding indigenous corn is tough because some of the seasons weren't so great this year. But kind of taking a page out of the Iroquois White Corn Project book, and everything's going out as hominy. So we're trying to save a little bit of that seed culture there, so there's nobody else growing our corns, if you will. So you know, I think we're kind of at that point where we'd like to see some folks growing those extra acres, because I know Tawnya, with opening up a restaurant in her store coming up soon, that she's going to have shelf space for some of this stuff to go on. That she's
There's more white here, just thinking about it.
Exactly. So, you know, we need more of these products. We don't need to just look at them in pretty pictures. We need, I don't need 5 seeds put in my hand. I need 5 pounds that I'm asking for, that I'm just going to cook with for a little bit. And I may do as a special, which is fine, but I may eventually want 50 pounds of that because my customers and clients like that. And I think as we can help a little bit to revitalize some of agriculture, it allows our indigenous chefs and seed people to make a little bit of a living off of the things that they've been working so hard to do. And as chefs, if we can kind of be the gatekeeper to the seed provenance and these other cultures, I think that works out great for everybody. Some people.
Well, we're definitely seeing that too with the chefs helping, right? Like we really have to support our producers and tell them, like, don't be scared to grow too much that you don't know what you're going to do with it. But yeah, I think we're really becoming a support system for those growers, so that when they're doing, you know, encouraging them to do bigger yields, and just knowing that they'll have somewhere for their produce to go. And then you're seeing with how much chefs are growing themselves, right? And then we're helping with community projects, community gardens. You know, we're growing a lot more, but like you mentioned, Dave, like there's a lot of hours in a day that we work, and to take any time to be able to fit that into our schedule is, you know, I don't think a lot of people realize just how much that is asking.
I think also, like when you were talking, Tawnya, about I can't remember exactly what it was, but I was thinking about being able to charge like exactly what things cost, like how much labor, and people take food for granted a lot. You know, they think, oh, this shouldn't cost that much, or that shouldn't cost that much, so some of my time I spend with the Indigenous Community Garden, and it supports a lot of projects around here, and I don't think people even value that here. Like if I'm not like writing something, or, you know, like the definition of doing sort of like, oh, that's like what you do for fun, or that's what, no, I like have to sleep too, you know, like
Right.
you know, so, you know, how do we make people real, like something that's been taken for granted for so long, like how do we help people see that these things are gifts, and
We as chefs have
commodity thing is nonsense, you know, like it's poison. You can be poisoned, you can pay nothing, or you can like,
and know these producers, and be advocates in our dining rooms and our stores and our events that we take part in. Coming from the farm to table kind of movement, if you will, that's kind of gone on for the past 15 or 20 years. I frequently would visit the dining room when somebody was upset about having to pay for something, and I could point pictures out of my phone of like, hey, this is the farm where this comes from. Open up the picture and kind of go, these are the chickens that are on the tables. This, because I had that relationship with my farmers.
The chickens you don't want to pay.
But it's you know, being able to say as a chef that we need to have a living wage for our farmers to have these great products, and these products usually, one of the things that I frequently heard was, oh, well, it's organic or it's local. It's supposed to be better. It tastes better, and it's supposed to taste so much different than a zucchini. No, I know that the land that's been grown on has no pesticides on it. I know it's not isn't a nuclear waste site or whatever. I know where it comes from. I know it's been picked, and it's at my door, and will last a few more days. So as a chef, sometimes buying local like that, things last longer. So you have a week and a half to sell something. So you know that you can buy that X amount and get that 5-pound discount or 20-pound discount or whatnot. So, but as you have these relationships with farmers, you can advocate for them in the dining room. And basically, I get confrontational about it. I get confrontational about it and say, if you can find better tomatoes in the city than these that are cheaper, tell me. And I'll take this, I'll buy this tomato for you and give it to you. Or I'll buy those.
I had a
thing that I often taken up on because I knew where the other restaurants were getting their products. Oh, well, these are local chickens, but he gets his chickens from North Carolina or Virginia. That's coming on a truck. That takes 2 or 3 days, and then it's 2 or 3 days in the warehouse, and then it's a week and a half old before it gets to my table. He said that was dead. I mean, that was running around 3 or 4 days ago.
It's also costing the environment.
I think that's been one of the blessings of COVID, though.
People are appreciating that, and they just can't get certain things. So I think as a lot of hobby farmers have kind of come to find out, I'm speaking from the farm to table movement here. We dealt with a lot of hobby farmers. So a lot of hobby farmers have found out, which I think where might be that hobby farmers are generally under 10 acres or up to 10 acres. People call that hobby farming. And I think sometimes people find that how hard that work is, it sounds remote, but how hard that work is and how much they need to charge for things, your average customers aren't willing to pay for. So I think it's up to us to advocate our own foodway as we're doing them. So possibly we have some things that are there in the dining room that aren't indigenously grown.
I thought that was one of the blessings of COVID, though, was it was a time for a lot of people in Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous communities to take on things like learning what it was to take on a garden or to grow some stuff, because they really didn't know. And it's kind of like throughout the US, we had that victory garden idea of where we really need that this year. But I think it was a consciousness that was awoken in people, like, man, like that took a lot of work. Right. And it's just this little teeny tiny garden. What are people doing that are taking on bigger gardens and they're not supported, or, they don't get volunteers, and, and then you can kind of shit on them, just be like, oh, well, don't you grow that? How come you don't have it? And, that really irks me to hear that, because it's like, they have no idea what goes into that one thing. And then you don't even want to give them nothing anyway, because you're like, you think that about my work?
Because I can buy
give it to people that care about me.
Right, because I can buy grocery store too. So, I think there's a disconnect there with the general public as to what they think is quality.
I don't know
our
if you
culture is very quantity a lot of the time. So,
well, Dave, I brought somebody up to cook with you last fall, and it was a skinny little person who was eating about 5,000 calories a day. And when he said, "Why are you hanging out with Dave and Mae?" he said, I eat all this food and I can't keep on weight, and I eat just a little bit of like the littlest bit of something, and I'm full.
Right.
And so when you're talking about quality, like there's no comparison. Like you could just eat garbage all day and your system knows that you're not getting the nutrients.
They're designed to be empty calories a lot of the time. And you're paying $3 for something that's in a byproduct of another process that they're making even more money on. So
I thought that was a great observation and a great compliment, though, that they could tell just in the way they felt in second one of like putting it in their mouth, that they felt satiated.
I think as you're cooking things and paying attention to things, and it's not bland, I think is another. We're kind of back to that again, whereas we're consciously putting that salt in there, or we've discovered that. I'll go back to the wild onions. The wild onions are in season, or the ramps are in season. I'm going to add those to this dish that everyone is used to not having that in. That I know our people ate in the springtime. Would be a natural thing to find morel mushrooms and ramps in a corn soup, because we were always eating corn soup, and we always had corn in abundance. So those three things may have been thrown together in a quick soup for the morning. There might be duck in that at one point. There might be moose in another. It's just what we had on hand during the day. So a lot of our flavors changed kind of as to what we found. So I can add different things to our melting pot. As I kind of write about food and write new recipes and think about things, one of my thoughts which gets a little bit of flack, is revolves around the Three Sisters, but I'm not really going to talk about that, but it's more so about taking our foods back out of the melting pot that everyone's been so anxious to have us melt into, if you will, because the things that are in that melting pot that are ours far outnumber the things that are in there from Western culture or European culture or from other cultures around the world. So 70% of our agriculture was native to the Americas, or is native to the Americas. So how I want to talk to people sometimes is about, reclaiming a potato or reclaiming a tomato, or the frankencorn that you might find in the store is still ours because it's a cousin. It might not be what we want to eat, or we know that it's not a healthy thing. But my thought is that I don't think that European Americans should be able to claim that corn just because they've crossed several of our corns to get to that point. That's still our corn. We still have ownership to that. We have kinship to that. So those beans that you eat out of the can, those are still ours. And I think
It's our diluted cousin.
Right, kind of a redheaded step cousin. But for us to reclaim things, it's a bit of pride for our kids and whatnot. So I think for us to claim everything, it allows our kids to have a sense of pride, and we need to build that for the next generations coming from beyond us. So I know folks like you and Jesse are serving the public far more than I am. How does the public receive your native creations when you make them, Jesse, at the restaurant?
It's been well received.
Some really good dishes you're doing. So
yeah, I've been getting a lot of attention in like local newspapers and radio interviews. It really holds value. One thing that I've been doing lately though is trying to take indigenous food out of the restaurant until I can, like what we talked about, really get a good healthy crop of Abenaki ingredients,
right.
Abenaki grown squash, corn, beans. So that way I can be true to the roots, and it's Abenaki food at that point instead of just indigenous food.
Right.
And also in like reclaiming, our crops, one thing I want to do is revitalize certain foodways that have almost become extinct in the Northeast. Like I was able to cook moose nose up in northern Maine with a Penobscot friend. I don't think there's anybody in the Northeast really doing that, at least in Wabanaki territory. I know out west towards the Cree they are, and a couple Mohawks still are, but that's a very flavorful, tasty piece of meat that, for whatever reason has gone out of style. But I think everyone should be eating moose nose because it's delicious.
Tawnya and I did beaver tails the other year.
I heard it's very similar, moose nose and beaver tails. Like that high fat cartilage.
That's fatty, yeah.
Yeah.
I think as you eat things like those moose noses and the beaver tails, you kind of realize how important fat was. I think I'm back onto that again, but how important fat flavoring to all of us. So it's important to eat that moose nose, or to eat those beaver tails, to understand where our food's been left since now. So what did we add in place of certain things? And I brought up bear earlier, and I think pork has been used in a lot of places where our bear or our moose nose or our beaver tails were used because we just couldn't get it. So
right, and through that, it was lost, and I think now is the time to reclaim and continue.
To reclaim it, or at least to reclaim the knowledge thereof, and be able to explain why we use pork fat, or chicken fat or turkey fat or whatever. I mean, we had turkeys, but I don't think our food was full of fat, but there was fat there, and it was appreciated. So I think kind of the 80s ruined a lot of us to eating fats that are healthy for our brains.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to do this audience question?
Yes, let's do audience questions.
It says, how do you all feel about the term chef? Does it conflict with any cultural terms or practices? I guess I can start. you're a chef or you're not, I think is what you would come down to. Did you go to school? Have you worked in a bunch of restaurants? Have you ran a restaurant? Like there's a lot to going into a chef, and what you'll notice among chefs is that it is a respected position because it's not easy to get there. So that term, obviously, like you can't just have a piece of paper and say, hey, I'm one now. Anybody can say that they're a chef. So, but there's a difference between chefs and home chefs or home cooks, right? And that's not
Right.
something to be ashamed of. It's just a different position. Like us, this is our life. I've been doing this for 26 years, and I do take that term very seriously. It took me like 20 years to even be comfortable to use it myself, and it does kind of irk me when I hear other people like, oh, you like, I'm a chef too, and it's like, well,
Just graduated culinary school.
that's cool. Like you're a good home chef. Yeah. Like even like to me, I know when I graduated, I was really like, I can't call myself a chef yet. Like I have no idea like all the stuff that those people do. So it's hard. It's hard knowing that like anybody can sit there and take that term and use it, and especially when they're not. You know, it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. And I guess the only thing we can do is just, you know, it comes out. The proof is in the pudding, right?
Right.
Because not your average person, you can be an excellent home chef, but can you walk into a convention center and feed 400 people in 2 hours, right? So that's the difference between a chef and a home cook, I think.
Right. I think as professionals, and I use this as an example, is that we work for a paycheck. Of course, we obviously have a passion for food and stuff, but to be a chef day in and day out, you have to learn what your customers want to eat. It's about your customer's palate just as much as it is about yours. You can make the best food in the world, but if they don't want to eat moose nose in the restaurant or beaver tail, they're not going to eat it. So we as chefs go through this daily. We as restaurant chefs, we don't have a captive audience that say somebody doing events or caterings do, or so we have to go through that day to day. Hey, they hated that, and I just spent a bunch of money on that. We've got to figure something else out to do with that and try to make a little bit of money, or at least a break even on. So I think that's a whole different mentality towards food than say a home cook gets or home chef gets, or somebody that spends a lifetime cooking home stuff and doing YouTube channel work. I don't always think that you understand how your public feels or reacts to certain things. So not to say that we understand everything, but I think it gives us a better understanding of the general public of how they receive things, as opposed to serving 300 people an event, the indigenous foods that you've created for the week. Well, they don't have any other choices, so that's what they're eating for the day. So it's either well received or not, but you're paid at the end of the day. If I keep trying to push that same menu for 4 weeks, nobody wants to eat it. We're empty, and I'm not getting paid, and I'm out of a job. So I don't mind the term chef. I don't, but it's I don't know. I take it with a little bit of a grain of salt nowadays, because there's a lot of people that aren't chefs that are calling themselves chefs.
Well, I've been cooking for 7 years. I've been the executive chef here at Sweetwater's for the last 4 years, and I still have a hard time using that word on myself, just because I feel like there's so much more that I have to learn before I reach the level of some of my peers, So
I've been in the business for 40 years, and I'm still learning things every other day,
Exactly.
So I think the better you are, the more you realize that hey, I don't know everything. I don't know everything. I'm gonna learn something new every day, and I might learn something from a kid just in to wash dishes.
Hey, have an open mind to learn.
Him, and you kind of go, holy shit, he's doing that. That makes total sense, and we've been doing it the hard way for a long time. So, I think sometimes as I travel as a chef and I talk to people about indigenous food, you have certain thoughts about things, and then you have these epiphanies about people going, well, why do you do it like that when we do it like this? And you look and you go, holy shit, you've only been shown one way from the elder that you've learned from, or whoever's been teaching it to your folks. You only know that one way. So then you learn that second way, and it's just like being a chef in your modern life, if you will, or your public life. So fun stuff. There's always a little bit of fun stuff going on.
Should we do another question?
Yeah.
Okay. What kind of culinary education or indigenous skill sharing are y'all advocating for or envisioning?
Well, that's a broad question there. what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? You know, I apprenticed my whole life, so it's not, you know, I'm not always a fan of the diploma mills, if you will, that have seemed to have popped up all over the country. I think you get a rudimentary set of skills from a lot of those things, but it's a certificate, and you know they want you to go on to the next 4 years of school again because they want you to have, you know, a master's in chefing. And a lot of the stuff that you're taught as a youth that's pertinent to the business isn't available to you to learn. You know, as a 50-year-old chef, there's no way I'm going to let a 20-year-old kid do my food cost.
Not going to happen.
It's never going to happen. So should that be part of your equation of learning? How about some continuing ed for those things? You know, chef is, you know, being a chef or in the food service industry is so multifaceted that it's tough. It all depends on what you want to do. I was lucky enough to be able to apprentice, you know, for some really good chefs that were thoughtful and would direct me in right ways, but that doesn't mean everybody gets that. I didn't have the best education with that, and I had a harder time as I was looking for executive chef's jobs, getting those jobs because all of my knowledge was hands-on. It wasn't with that certificate that I might not remember a thing about at 30, but I can hold that certificate and someone will give me a chef's job. It doesn't mean I'm going to do a better job. It just means that I have this certificate that I may have learned that. So if you just want to learn about your nation's food, go hang out with the elders. I don't know what other folks are like, but we have cookhouses, we have cook shacks, we have things that when I taught in Oklahoma for the Chickasaw Nation, I tried to get the kids to hang out with the old guys stirring the big cast iron pots of pashofa at the events, to just hang out with older folks, and you get little bits of knowledge.
That's what I was gonna say. Is I'm so thankful for you all, because I came in to learn because we have issues. Like, I live in Virginia now, and the tribes here in Virginia expressed interest in learning about food security. So I embarked on trying to learn more about foodways, and then I met you all, and that's been the greatest joy. Like, I love eating better and gardening and knowing things about food, but also the relationships and friendships I've built have helped me become a more sustainable person, like from the inside out. So hanging out or meeting people, you know, like just building friendships, and that's like, I talk with my students. We have talking circle once a week, and we discuss how food helps us make ceremony, how it helps us open our hearts and minds to finding relatedness to the land and other people. And then when that starts to heal, feeling better about ourselves inside too. So it's, you know, not maybe necessarily always about like an end goal of, you know, diplomas or becoming a chef necessarily, but just becoming reconnected and healing. Maybe that sounds corny, but
no, not at all.
I felt such joy in knowing you all. I loved eating too.
Well, that's just it, right? Like, I don't think we're advocating for an actual program, because we're like kind of programmed to death at this point. But everybody's education is unique, right? And we're all from separate nations, and where we learn from isn't like, oh, I'm going to go to that school because I want to learn that. That's not really an option for us right now. But like Dave said, there's so many opportunities in our own communities that, you know what, you don't always need an invite, right? You can go there and ask questions, hang out, help out. That's how we learn, right? And that's also how we're given teachings and in these special messages that come to us, because we probably need them. That's necessarily something that can come from a textbook or that they can share in a textbook, because our people we don't do that, right? So we're not necessarily advocating that if somebody has to be a traditional chef to do something, or a culinary wise, but you know, if you're a good home cook, there's nothing wrong with saying it. You know what, I'm a good, you know, I'm a longhouse cook, I'm a bush cook. Like, bush cooks are really underutilized because they know our foods and they know them well, right? And those are some of my favorite people to learn with or to cook with, just because they're like, oh, I did this, that, I didn't know what I was doing, but they've had years of experience now, and that they really undervalue their own education, right? Or what it is that they have to share. And it's another thing of encouraging people to share what it is that they do know. right? Because if anybody wants to learn, they should be able to learn. But does that have to be in a formal setting? I don't think so, because in the end, what it does is it just makes us all more dynamic cooks.
Yeah, definitely. It's bringing the community back into food as well. That dynamic where traditionally it was very community based, from harvest to eating right there to bringing it back and eating and then saving, you know, for the long haul. I guess that's kind of the indigenous skills that I want to, you know, approach with what I'm doing today, is bringing that back to the community and making everyone a part of that versus just, you know, the general public with what I serve at work or my family, but, you know, the community as a whole. And especially bring back the agricultural calendar, cooking within that, you know, what time of year do I cook this, harvest this, yada, yada, yada. So.
Right. I think there's been a lot of talk earlier about trauma and whatnot and past memories and stuff. And I find from doing events like the intertribal food event that we did, the boucheries that I participate here in the Southeast, is that one of the things that we all kind of miss, and maybe that's something genetic or in our genes, is that we miss that camaraderie of those collective efforts to feed ourselves or to save food. So these are other things that I promote. Tipping corn is a big one, and some of my friends that are listening here from boucherie know all about that. So when you take the tip off of the corn after you've made hominy or you're heading into making masa, you make a smoother dough when you take that tip of each piece of corn off, and it's a giant pain in the ass. And it takes a long time. But when you sit down to 4 or 5 tables, 8 or 10 people at every table, it goes pretty quick. But the best thing about it is that there's 40 people there that you're talking to and you're having a good time.
I saw that at boucherie.
About.
like you saw these tables of people like tipping the corn, and they were all laughing and telling jokes and having a good time. And I also remember you two out doing the beaver tails. You look like you were having fun too.
We were. Lots of beaver jokes, a lot of bad tip jokes with the corn, but that's chef life.
But that's
not
like
always
also
politically
correct. When we think about the concept of nourishment, they break down our food. They say, oh, these are the vitamins and minerals you need. If you took just those vitamins and minerals, you'd never be healthy. And so there's so much more to nourishment that this movement actually gets at. So about relationship. And like you were saying about the 3 sisters and that being a vehicle for flavor, like if you eat that, you're going to be okay. And then you just have fun with what you add to it, and then
I'm going to want to choke you if you make the same one every week. But, I want, pick some of the dandelion greens that are out on the lawn and throw them in there at some point to change it up a little bit. So are we running out of time here?
3 more minutes.
Oh, wow. How about one last question? Anybody have a question or anybody want to say anything?
Was there one in there still? Let me see if there's a question in the chat.
Nope, no more.
No audience questions. Jesse, you want to do some yakking for a minute or two?
Sure. So one thing that I've been taught with cooking is all about building relationships, whether it's relationships with fellow chefs, relationship with vendors, relationship with farmers, relationships with the guest. It's about building those relationships. And, as Indigenous chefs, I feel we have an obligation, if you will, to build relationships with the seeds and the wild game and, honor that as best as possible. And yeah, I guess that's it.
All right. I'm going to close it up here before we get yelled at. Yahweh, everybody. Thank you for attending. And we're not talking about colonial people. Indigenous Peoples Day. We're still here. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right. Good seeing y'all.
Yeah, you all too.
Bye.
Bye.